Hi everybody, it's Marcus Collins and
Rachel Addis.
And tonight we are going to talk about a buyer's masterclass, smart strategies to compete in today's competitive, and I think we would agree it's a competitive environment. Certainly right at the moment here, we're recording this in just early March and it's really competitive out there. So all the strategies we're going to talk about tonight will fare well in today's market, as well as what will happen with the rest of 2021. So why do we do this? Well, we think, if I can put my cursor in the right place, there we go. Buying and selling is way too important to leave to chance. So what we're going to do this evening is talk you through the whole buying process. The agenda, we're going to talk about smart decisions. I'm going to talk a little bit about the market. I'm going to focus a little bit on Arlington, but we have data for a whole range of different towns. We're going to talk about the process of buying a home, smart buying, smart search. How do you find that needle in a haystack? How do you not get overwhelmed by the search? Then we're going to look at the offer process, and then we'll finish off with some anecdotes really about what buying in the time of COVID-19 is like. Slowly coming out of that, but I still think it's still there. So why don't I start with a little bit about what's happening with the market moving forward. So characteristics of the local. What we do every year is produce two documents. There they are, you can see them on the screen. Two, the Lexington and Arlington Market Review. We focus on these two towns that are the closest to where we are. Lots and lots of information in there in terms of all the graphs about what's happening in the market. So if you're a numbers person in any way, lots of information, what's happening, and our analysis of what's happening. And then we do some predictions about what's going to happen in 2021. So, but what I thought I would do this evening is give you a quick overview of what happened in 2020 really, or the last 10 years, but focusing a little bit on 2020 because everybody's asking, so what happened in 2020 with COVID? So let's go ahead and do that. And we'll say we're going to focus this evening on Arlington. Single family home prices. The median price, as you can see here, been rising steadily. Took a little bit of a slowdown in 2019. That was because there was lots of talk, if you can remember back to that time, that perhaps there was going to be an economic correction. And so many sellers put their home on the market, or not many, a lot of sellers, not that many, not enough. Buyers were a little bit reticent to buy the homes, thinking maybe prices will be a little bit lower, pre-COVID of course. And that's why we saw a slight slowdown in the price appreciation in 19. Once we get to 2020, you can see that rose quite steadily. That was about a 3 to 4% price appreciation, really what we've seen over the last, 4 or 5 years, I guess. Steady growth. In terms of the number of sales, relatively static. A little bit of a dip since 2015. Some of that caused by today's sellers struggling to buy their next home, because if you're a seller in this market, you're clearly also a buyer somewhere. And it's been quite difficult to buy a home over the last 3 to 4 years. And that slowed down the sellers being able to just sell whenever they wanted. So that's kind of where we are. Slight reduction, although as you can see, there's really no impact of COVID. And if we focus a little bit on the month by month, the week by week, what happened last year, you can actually see in the single family market a little bit of an effect of COVID. If I use the cursor here, the orange color is 2019 and the blue color here is 2020. As you can see, in 2019 there was a relatively steady rise in homes going under agreement. But here in late February, early March timeframe through to May, the curve flattens. And there were almost no listings coming on the market, therefore almost no sales. There was relatively static. But as soon as we got to May, this was a big question that we had. Is it going to be early May? Is it going to be late May before the buyers come back in the market? Turns out it was early May, and you can see it here. As soon as we got into May, the number of listings rose, and therefore the number of sales rose, and off they went. And so by the time we get to the end of the year, we're about parity with where we were with 2019. So even with all the uncertainty of COVID, clearly that's been for the last 12 months or so now, the real estate market fared very well, and we had roughly the same number of sales that we saw in 2019. we're in 2020 when we're doing this. So we always look at the sell price to list price ratio as a great metric to get a sense of buyer confidence. If buyers are confident in the market, then they're willing to pay over the asking price. And that means that the sell price to list price ratio is over 100%. And as you can see, even though it dipped a little bit in 2019, for the reasons I explained before, it rose to almost 103. It's about 102.9, so almost 103. It rose to in 2020, showing that confidence came back in the market after we had that slowdown in March through May. So, a solid picture for single families. Condominiums, similar picture in terms of prices. It rose. Again, we saw a slight rise up to $665 now for the median price of condominiums. Condo sales is always a little bit of variability, inevitably, and you can see that there in the number of condominium sales. So that's not unusual to see some ups and downs, as you can see in that 10-year numbers. Cumulative sales were kind of interesting in that overall, there was no impact of the COVID in that March through May timeframe. The two graphs are roughly similar. A little bit of a slowdown in late May, but overall roughly similar. What we did see though, as we got to that September timeframe, a lot more condominiums coming on the market, a lot more condominium sales as well, but a little bit of a slowdown in the market. In the condo market. What we were getting from our buyers were that there was some hesitation to move into a condominium with that shared space. Now, that's the negative of a condominium, is that shared space. The positive of a condominium is the prices, of course. Almost at $1 million for a single family, for median, $665 for condominiums. There's a big difference. So yes, I'm a little bit nervous about moving into a condominium with some shared space. But on the other hand, it's $665. It's a number that I can afford. So those two are kind of playing out.
And just to comment, I had a few clients who actually were very successful buying condos in Arlington at the end of last year. Mm-hmm. And what we noticed is weekend after weekend looking at condos, there weren't many to choose from. They were duplexes. So the mindset of a condo being part of a community, luckily it wasn't that. It was more of a two-family. Right. The challenge was that these were new condos. The builders hadn't quite finished the work. The pricing was rather high. So for my buyers, as long as they could be a little patient, they were able to negotiate a better price. Right. But it really was a mindset to get around. Not only was it the lifestyle they wanted, but were the HOAs going to be reasonable? Mm-hmm. And in one case, it was a bit of a challenge because the condo docs hadn't even been developed, so it took quite a while. Right. In another situation, it went more smoothly. But fortunately for them, they did find a condo, but there wasn't much on the market in Arlington.
Right. Yep. So. Here it came on, but overall, as you can see, after that kind of peak of condos coming on, by the end of the year, we have a lot more condo sales than we did in 2020. In 2019, excuse me. Yeah. And so if you look at the sell price to list price ratio, it dipped a little bit. Most of that dip was actually in the latter part of 2020. That's when we saw that. So in the first part of 2020, it was very buoyant, and it slowed down a little bit at the end of 2020. If you kind of plot it month by month, you can see that ratio begin to decline. That decline in 2019 is for the same reason as I mentioned with single families, that kind of perception that there might be a housing correction, therefore sellers were keen to put their homes on the market, buyers were a little bit reluctant to buy, and that's what dragged that sell price to list price ratio, that kind of buyer confidence disappeared a little bit. Dissipated, perhaps a better word. So, 2020 summary, even with COVID, a very positive picture, similar number of sellers in the market. As the year went on, an increased number of buyers in the market, and here we are in early 2021. There are still lots of buyers in the market, homes that come on the market here in spring 2021. There's lots of competition for those homes. So we shifted in 2019 from that softening sellers market really to a seller's market. 2019 a little bit softer. 2020 came along and it got much more positive, and therefore we got some positive price appreciation overall in both condominiums and single families. As to the future, well, clearly there's still a lot going on. We're still in the middle of the pandemic. Vaccines, they say middle of the year, 3 to 4 months away. Still there's some recession to kind of work its way out. We do have a new administration. Not clear how long the vaccinations will be before they actually bring us back to normal. But overall, it's fair to say that in certainly the second half of 2020 and 2021 that we can see so far, the housing market's fared very well in most of Massachusetts. In terms of 2021, what are our predictions? If we kind of divide it into buyers and sellers, sellers, it's still tough to buy their next home. So there is some hesitation, there's some unwillingness, there's some inability to put their home on the market. And so we'll see a similar number of single family homes come on the market 2021 that we saw in 2020, just because it's tough for sellers to buy, essentially. In terms of the number of buyers, if anything, there are more buyers in the market than we've seen previously. Certainly looking to move out perhaps of the inner city. They don't need to be in Boston anymore, and working from home 2 to 3 days a week requires them to have a slightly bigger home. Hard to get that in central Boston, so perhaps they'll move a little bit further out, but still they want to be relatively close to Boston. That's why Arlington, for example, Lexington to Belmont, those towns which are very close and have good transportation ties to Boston, fare well because the homes in general are larger than they are in central Boston, but it still gives them good access to Boston itself. So similar number of sellers to 2020, more buyers, if anything, than we saw, at least as many, which is a lot, of buyers in 2021. So overall, a positive picture, and that price appreciation running at a similar level that we saw in 2020, 3 to 5%. That's kind of where we see. So you do need, and this kind of lays us the foundation for the rest of this talk, which is really about, it's not going to be an easy market to buy in. Therefore, you need to figure out how to compete in this very competitive market, as well as work around the limitations, if you like, of what COVID brings. So that kind of leads us into the Buyer's Masterclass itself in terms of, how do you do the process? What is the offer process? So we'll kind of go through in a step-by-step way all the different aspects of buying a home. So let's start off with the process. Information is power, and how do buyers determine exactly what are they looking for? How do they actually work that out?
Thank you. Okay, so I find that when I first get the opportunity to talk to people about wanting to buy a home, our conversation really centers on 3 things, because we found that in talking to people, there are 3 main areas that drive a family's decision as to where they want to move to. And it typically is, what type of commute do they want in terms of getting into Boston? How important is the school system? So for instance, with commuting, is it okay if they're half an hour outside of Boston, or do they really want to be nearer? Do they want to be near public transportation? When it comes to schools, given their family dynamics, do they want to be in an area that has a reputation for a great school system? Is a good school system good? Is a town where you have flexibility as to the type of school that your daughter or son, child's going to be in? And or is it not an issue because perhaps they don't have children in the home? And last but not least, how much of a house can they get for their budget? And how much land do they want? So, looking at the fact that these are the things that will really help us hone in on how to, best counsel them as to what town or, where to look is really where our conversation begins.
And it'll be interesting to see, because we've all been working from home in 2020. We are beginning to kind of shift a little bit in 2021. It'll be interesting to see how, because you play with those 3 things. You can't have all 3. You can't have a great commute, great schools, and really affordable homes. Right. That just doesn't happen. So to what extent will the commute become less important? I think we've seen a little bit of that. The size of the home becomes more important. Commute less. So how that will change in 2021 will be kind of interesting moving forward.
Absolutely. And I find that buyers are very smart when they're looking to make the biggest decision in their life, and that's something that clearly we're well aware of as well when we're talking to them. Location is everything, and you cannot move the location of a town.
True.
And so fortunately, that's something that when people are spending well over asking, as we see in our local markets, when they're buying in a good town, there's a more confidence that their house is going to appreciate. It's going to be easier to sell when it comes time perhaps to sell. So yeah, location is definitely right up there.
Right, and schools as well, bringing it back to that point. Even though schools may not be important to a buyer today, maybe it will be in the future, but even if it's not important to them and given their life, where they are in their life, it'll be important when you come to resale.
Right.
You know, as you're buying a home, you still need to think about somebody's going to buy this home after I sell it.
So being very humble here, I remember when I bought a car, I was so disappointed when someone deflated my purchase and said, the moment you drive off the lot, your car depreciates. Well, fortunately, with a home, when you buy in a good town, that's not going to happen.
Right, exactly. That's important. Needs and wants.
So again, when it comes to helping people hone in on where they want to buy a home, it really comes down to helping people identify what's the difference between what they want in a home and what they need in a home. Mm-hmm. And so there are the must-haves. So things like the commuting time, the school system, number of bedrooms and bathrooms, whether a garage is important. Nowadays, with everyone's lifestyles being turned upside down, whether or not there's a space to have an office, you know, in the home. Things like that tend to be really the needs of people these days when it comes to buying a home in the area. You know, being realistic. You can't get everything, as you already you know, honed in on that. But it's important to also have that conversation around what would be your wish list. And what I have found actually in this day and age with the competitive market that we're in, when a home has one thing that pops, then when people walk in that home and they have that visceral feeling of, I can see my stuff here and I love the way the windows are, or what do you know, look at the way that the living room plays off the kitchen. Like, it just has to be one thing sometimes that gets people pulled in and makes a whole difference. Mm-hmm. So that wish list is important. We can't always get it, but really spending time to understand the must-haves. Clearly, another thing that's really important, and I hate to make light of this, but because it is really important, it's so good to have a conversation around who will be the decision makers when it comes to finding that home. You know, unfortunately, there's been instances where you meet buyers and they want to make an offer on a home, and they're all set to do it, and then you find out that there's someone else who's going to be a big decision maker in that purchase, and they don't like the house.
Right.
And so we try very early on to learn who are those decision makers going to be, get them involved in the process, get them excited about the home search, and it really makes a big difference.
Right, important to do that right up front, because it's the worst thing in the world is to fall in love with somewhere only to find that another one of those decision makers, maybe it's somebody who's giving you some money, we'll talk about money in a minute, of course, they don't like it. So that's understanding that right at the beginning is important. And then budget. For a house, you have to talk money at the end of the day.
Absolutely. So another very important piece of that initial conversation that we have with folks is, do you know what your budget is? Have you gotten a pre-approval? And there's lots of avenues, as we well know, with all the access on the computers. You can do your mortgage calculator, you can figure it out online. But I find that, you know, back to something else initially when we were talking about why we do these. For us, real estate and helping people with real estate, finding a home, selling a home, it's not a transaction, it's really a relationship. Mm-hmm. And I think that speaks to everything that we do, and whether it's we're talking to our clients, whether we're putting them in touch with a lender, or whether we're helping them find a real estate attorney, from beginning to end, it's all about that relationship. So getting your pre-approval is very important. And if you don't have a relationship with a lender, we have local lenders who we know are very reputable. We put you in touch with them. They help you understand what the highest price is that you can comfortably buy that home. Recognizing that after you've submitted certain documentation to them, whether they give you a pre-qualification or a pre-approval letter, we tend to find the pre-approval letter definitely holds more weight when it comes to submitting an offer. So we really look to help you get a pre-approval letter. The pre-approval letter is determined based on so many things that you submit. It's your assets, it's your income, it's other different things that are expenses in your life. When you get that pre-approval, you don't necessarily have to buy a home for that whole pre-approval, and that's another part of our strategy when we're looking at homes. Whether or not you're in a competing situation, you may not have a pre-approval for everything, the whole amount that you can afford. But in any event, it helps you set your parameters. When you get an offer accepted, we do submit a pre-approval, but once that offer is accepted, you can shop around and look for a lender that's going to give you a better program, a better rate. Right. So that helps take the edge off as well. You know, when you mentioned that we're fortunate that the towns that we tend to do a lot of transactions in are very, very popular. Why? Because they have a good school system, because their location is very close to getting into the city, because people can get a lot of land, or there's a diverse community that appeals to them. Whatever the case is, it's important to know what it is that's important to you, so that when you get that pre-approval, you can be also honing in on the right types of homes, because oftentimes with competition, you're going to have to be prepared to get a couple different pre-approvals to help you up your game to make your offer even stronger.
Key thing though is, as Rachel mentioned, you don't necessarily need to spend everything in your
Right.
pre-approval. It's good in a competitive environment to get the largest pre-approval you can. It shows that you're strong, but that doesn't mean you have to spend that amount of money. You may feel that you want to bring that back a little bit. You don't want to be house poor.
Right.
We are going to get back to going out to dinner, doing things outside the home. So that's coming back, let's face it. So, it's important to remember that you don't necessarily have to say go all the way up to your pre-approval. You go to what's comfortable, less than your pre-approval.
And another thing that I think is important to point out is that when we're working with clients and we hone in on different towns, there's different strategies to use with different towns. So in a town like a Lexington or an Arlington, we want you to know up front that to really have your to be in the game, it's best to be an 80% borrower and 20% down. Whereas some other towns you can be a 90% borrower and only put 10% down. But we want to help set the right expectation.
Yep.
Because again, if you're looking in a town where you're really going to be pushing yourself further than you're going to be comfortable, then that may open up other challenges that this is supposed to be not that stressful, even though home buying can be very stressful and extremely emotional.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I think that leads into the role of the buyer's agent in terms of as you said before, very much a relationship.
Yeah.
Very much a relationship.
Absolutely. And something else that I think is also really important to point out, for those of you who have either been in the real estate market before, where you've bought homes or you've watched other people, there was a time where there really wasn't any representation for buyers. And luckily in recent years, it's now a requirement that in the state of Massachusetts, it's important that we talk to you and explain to you that you have the right to have buyer representation. You complete a form called the Mass Disclosure, and that's just really important because again, naivety is only good for in some things.
It outlines what the role of a buyer's agent is, but it's important that there's a legal role of a buyer's agent. There's also the role of a buyer's agent in terms of absolutely understanding what your requirements are.
So for me, when I think of my role as a buyer's agent, very important that you appreciate and you recognize that I work for you, that anything that we talk about is held in confidence, that it's my goal to really understand where you're coming from, what type of home that you want, what's the best price to help you look in, what are the terms and conditions that I'm going to help you with so that you can have an offer get accepted. I'd like to think that I bring wisdom, I bring some experience, I bring advice. It's really important also to build that trust, because right from the get-go, I want people to understand that for me, the most important thing here is at the end of the day, I help you with a transition, with a stage in life that is such an important one. And so if you're looking at homes that I feel do not really speak to what I'm hearing that you want, you're not going to hear me say make that offer and pull the trigger and spend all your money. All kidding aside, I think that sometimes it's so important that people know that we do have, all the time that we have your back. We sometimes find that that's not always the case. So my goal is to also educate you about the local market, to really help you understand what the inventory looks like in a certain town. So if you have $800,000 to spend, I'm not necessarily going to take you to a town where the amount of inventory in that $800,000 price point is very limited. I'd much rather help you look in a town where $700,000, $800,000 is going to have a lot more inventory. Right. So it's really about educating you about the local market. With MA Properties, it's wonderful that we have so many statistics on our website. We can help people navigate our website and really educate themselves as well, not just through us educating them about different real estate markets. Also, once you have an accepted offer, it's about managing the whole process with you. So it's not just getting the offer written correctly, but it's helping to manage the inspection. It's helping to put you in touch with the right attorney so that you're going to have a very smooth transition when it comes to signing the purchase and sale agreement, also known as the P&S, and just continuing to be there with you throughout the whole stage until closing.
And I think what's important is that many buyers think that the buyer's agent role is to write an offer. But if you look at the time it takes to buy a home, all the way from thinking about buying a home to actually closing on a home, there's way more time spent before you write the offer
Absolutely.
Than there is actually in the process. And that's really, I think, the role that we see as a buyer's agent. It really isn't transactional, just like you said. It's not about writing the offer. In the end, it has to be, of course, but there's so much more you do at the beginning to understand the buyer's needs. Does that make sense? Which towns should you look at? All of that takes a lot more time up front than just writing the offer, and that's important.
Absolutely, and also to point out that in these towns where we're finding that there's a lot of competition, it's setting an expectation that you may not get the first house. And you may not get the second, and you may not get the third, but you really watch as people get the hang of that and they understand the strategy and how their mindset has to change from some of the things they thought they needed to maybe they don't need, but they really want this. And so ultimately, it definitely is a whole process. We know too that so many of our clients become clients for life, Marcus. We love that.
They do, yeah, they do.
And they become our friends.
Become our friends, very much so. And that difference, that most of the time, most of the effort is spent before you write the offer, really differentiates a buyer's agent from a listing agent. Because many buyers ask, shouldn't I just write the offer with a listing agent? Or everything we've talked about, and a lot of what we'll talk about moving forward, will all be about that time before you even think about writing an offer. And that's really, the difference there between the buyer's agent and the listing agent.
And thanks. I just want to point out one thing, if you don't mind. Something else that's really key for buyers to understand is that you're not forced to work with anyone. We don't make you sign a contract. You don't have to, if it's not a good connection. We want people to understand that, again, you have the right to a buyer's agent. That buyer's agent should be looking out for you, really understanding the process, understanding what you're looking for, so that if at any time you're finding that it's not the best fit, you can back off and take a step back. And that leads very much to even with the role of the listing agent, because I think there is this sense sometimes that I'm going to get a discount, I'm going to get a better deal if I work directly with the seller's agent. And that's really something that's not true. And in fact, it's really not in your best interest to work with a seller's agent when you go to see a home, because as we know, the seller's agent is working for the seller. And their goal is to get the seller the best price, the best terms and conditions for the seller. If you do buy through the listing agent, you're not going to save money. The commission is already contractually agreed upon between the seller and their agent. And I think that's really, really important, right? It's a conflict of interest for the listing agent. As we just said, the listing agent is looking to get the most money from you. Whereas for us, and this is something that we've seen unfortunately play out sometimes, a home will be sitting on the market for quite a while. And a buyer comes along and sees the home and thinks, oh, that's going to be a good house for me. Or the buyer's relocating from another part of the country. They've been assigned a buyer's agent. And hopefully the goal of the buyer's agent in those cases is when a home has been sitting for a while, there's got to be some room for negotiation, you would hope. So again, really important that you understand a buyer's agent is there for you and the seller's agent is there for the seller.
For the seller. He said, listing agent or seller's agent, buyer's agent is a clear differentiation. And I think when you kind of bring those two together, when you get the right person and that role as a buyer's agent, that's really when it makes a difference. Becoming that, it's all about the relationship, it's all about becoming a trusted advisor, spending a lot of time with a potential buyer, understanding everything that they need, and then, right now we understand it, here's where you should be looking. Let's go and write offers on the home.
And also, I believe, given in this time just of life with so many options that people have, which is wonderful, people should have options. But until they've had a taste of what it's like to have that relationship with your agent, first of all, it's fun, the whole process. Then it becomes really intense. Then there's that feeling of incredible accomplishment to get the house, right? And then the excitement that they're moving into that home. And that's why when it all just comes together so beautifully, it's a relationship that's going to stand the test of time. Whereas so often with some of these other outfits where I think you can go and buy a house, unfortunately, you're just one of a number. Right. And yet
it's a transaction.
Okay, that may work for you, but you have a choice.
Right.
And I think that's what's so important to point out.
And given that, we just showed the Arlington market, average price of a condominium, $665. The average price of a single family this year, anyway, it's almost guaranteed this year in Arlington will be over $1 million. Yeah. It's a big investment to make. You have to make the right investment, and that's why why we take the time to spend time understanding what you need, so that we understand, as it says here, so you understand the market. Where is the market going? What's happening? Why is it so buoyant as it is? Should I be looking at a different town? All of that is the conversation that we have before we even start looking at homes, really.
Absolutely.
That's key. So, smart buying. Couple of different strategies here, because it is a competitive environment. It is very competitive in that early spring market when we're recording this. But throughout 2021, I think we're going to be in a competitive environment. It's not magically going to become easy to buy a home, I think it's fair to say.
Especially, as you pointed out, sellers don't really know where they want to go yet.
Right.
So there's limited inventory, and the motivated buyers are out. So absolutely. So let's talk about smart buying. Okay. So when buyers go out to see homes, typically there's the homes that present so beautifully, or they're new construction, and then there are the homes that you can tell need a little love. So the challenge is to help you also understand what's your threshold. Are you okay with a home that needs to be upgraded? Or do you want a home that you can, do you want a home, that's fresh and new and all that? Or do you want a home that you potentially can see past some things, that is a fixer-upper? And are you looking for a discount? If you're looking for a discount, I'm going to caution you not to use that word. It's not about a discount, but it's about more negotiation power, right? So it's really understanding what's the situation, what's going to happen when we get out there.
And it's important to understand what type of person you are. Are you okay spending, your weekends at Home Depot, or are you not? And it really will it'll play out. You kind of think about, do we go, say here, strategy one, which is
take on the competition, get comfortable with it, recognize that there are going to be bidding wars for those desirable homes, especially the ones that are priced properly, because we know when it comes right down to it, it's pricing. Has it been priced properly? Has it been exposed to a lot of people? So are a lot of people looking at it? Are you okay? I really think it's really helpful too to help people understand that just because there's going to be competition doesn't mean that it has to be a terrible experience. It can be a good experience because we have a strategy of how to help you deal with it. That's one way to do it, to leverage the experience and expertise of us as buyer's agents so that you are successful regardless of whether or not there's competition. So competition doesn't scare me. And I don't want it to scare my buyers.
You just have to be aware that it's there and then tailor your offer accordingly based on the fact
Sure, and I don't want to get into it yet, but I know that I think we cover it soon, that there are ways that we will say to our buyers, if there's going to be competition, first of all, let's understand how the listing agent is handling the offers. Is there a due date? Is there an offer deadline and the seller is not going to take something beforehand? Because that's always a very frustrating situation. But if there is an offer deadline and we know that you, the buyer, really want the home, we're going to counsel you on having a pre-inspection. We're going to counsel you on writing your offer differently so that you have an inspection threshold. We're going to do some things up, in advance. Right. Personal letters, sometimes people want to write them, sometimes people don't. There's all different things, but we give you the choice. Because at the end of the day, it's how much do you want the house? And if you want it, we're going to help you.
Yep. Strategy 2 is a different one, and it's really about, I love the way you say that, right? The home that needs a little love, right? It needs some fixer, it needs some work to see its full potential.
And one of the things I think is really important to point out, and sellers are starting to really realize this, buyers are savvy. Buyers have been going out weekend after weekend, at least my clients have, and they're starting to get the hang of it. They'll walk in a house and they're thinking about the price, and right off the bat, the first time you walk in that house, whatever entranceway you go in, it's going to hit them one way or the other. So if they see that something's looking pretty shoddy, but okay, it's just paint, I can deal with that. Oh, it's wallpaper, I can take that down. We're going to talk a little bit soon with pictures about the fact that there's tile that you can paint over. Right. But at the end of the day, it's about where are you at as a buyer? Are you okay with having to do some improvements? Are you not? And that's also our role, is to help you look past certain things to know what is okay and shouldn't scare you, right?
Right. Key thing with this though as well is there are things you can change: wallpaper, paint tiles. You can change kitchens. There are things you can't. Right. Location being a good one. Right. I mean, if it's on a busy street, no amount of love, no amount of work is going to move it from being on a busy street.
Okay, so I'm going to hold that thought for a second because I've shared two very real examples that happened recently. One is having some buyers look at a house on a very busy street. Now, that house still had 3 or 4 offers, which was amazing to me. It just, again, shows you low inventory in Lexington, very motivated buyers. My buyers could look past that because when it came to the needs and the wants, that was a non-issue because they still felt that they were sort of in a city environment. They didn't mind the noise, or they didn't mind seeing the cars go back and forth on the street. When they were in the home, fortunately, the home was quiet. On the other hand, one of the members of the couple walked in and immediately had a very negative feeling about some of the choices that were used. So in his mind, immediately he was thinking, if they're using that type of choice as a finish, what else are they cutting corners in? So there are things that once an impression is made, you can't take it back.
That's true. Very much so.
But another very good example with taking something like you cannot change the location on a busy street. There was a home years ago in Lexington that I took buyers to. They didn't like it because it was a busy street. When that house sold at top dollar, I ran into the buyers months later. They loved it because it reminded them of Cambridge. So there you go. You think you wouldn't be able to sell a house on a busy street?
Right.
The flow, the layout of the house, that's very important. You cannot necessarily change that.
Yep.
So really important to understand what buyers are looking for when it comes to that.
And it's really about the cosmetics here, and we give you some examples here.
Yes. So first of all, if we were representing those sellers, we would make sure that they knew, bringing their home on the market, they wouldn't want to have it look like that.
That's true.
Right? But all kidding aside, buyers coming in would need to consider that the size of the room, getting rid of the wallpaper. The size of the room is decent. Get rid of the wallpaper. Paint it. What a difference.
Yeah, look at the difference that actually makes.
So when we represented those sellers, look at how we represented them. The house on the right, the picture on the right is lovely.
Because you have
really nice.
When you think of this from the seller's perspective for a moment, and if the house looked like the house you see there, all they need to do is do that cosmetic work, because all of a sudden the home that you see, the spruced up home, that will garnish much more competition. That's when you have to think about strategy one of competition. How do you structure your offer to compete in a competitive environment? The whole beauty of this from a buyer's perspective is if the seller hasn't done that, if it just looks like it does there with wallpaper on the wall, guess what? Take the wallpaper off, paint it. You can convert it to this. Now all of a sudden the buyer pool for the home with wallpaper is far smaller.
Yeah.
And therefore it's much easier to buy.
Absolutely, it's great. And looking at this example, here's a kitchen that definitely wasn't ready to come on the market. And you look at the white appliances, we know that buyers at any price point. In this case, we look at the new photo, the kitchen looks just charming and the white appliances look really well. But we also know that buyers at any price point love the idea of new construction. Yep. So I think our goal is to help put things in perspective. Buying middle of the range stainless steel appliances can be very feasible, and you can immediately also spruce up the kitchen even more so. So just looking past things makes a big difference. Same thing, look at this one. You have yellow, a lovely color. The tiling on the floor and the countertops may not suit you. It's okay. Look at the kitchen now. It looks lovely. So.
I think it's also important to remember that this is just cosmetic. You may long-term decide to fix the kitchen. Right. But given your finances today, given you're trying to understand, are you going to stay in the town, whatever it may be, this is a good quick fix to fix the kitchen. And then over time, you may say now it makes sense to switch out the appliances, perhaps switch out the cabinets too, change the flooring from vinyl here to tile. So it's almost like a let's do this today in the next 6 months after you move in, let's say. Just do that so it becomes a livable home. And then moving forward, you can think about, what do I really want to do with it? Do I want to open up from the dining room to the kitchen, for example? Absolutely. Do I want to do a little bit more? But you don't need to do that immediately. You can do these cosmetic changes that we see here, do those immediately, and then longer term think about.
Absolutely. And from our experience working with clients, we can help put things in perspective, because what you don't know is scary. So when you can say it won't cost that much money to do some of these things, I think people can feel much more comfortable with pursuing a home that needs some love.
Right.
So, amazed at what we can do to bathrooms these days with some TLC, some paint. So in this case, you can see that the blue tiling, or the blue tiles and the flooring were replaced, and the bathroom looks really nice on the right-hand side. In
this case, they just painted the tiles, as Rachel mentioned before. It's easy to do. Again, perhaps a stopgap, but that gets you into the home and at the price point that you want, get you into the town. And then you can think about changing it moving forward if you wanted to reconfigure the bathroom. Same with this one here.
And also, just sticking with these photos, I think it also points out, I was telling you, I believe buyers are very savvy these days. They're used to looking at photos of homes. And photos are often so misleading, So you have to be aware of that too when you look at something. And it hurts more as a buyer when you're very disappointed and you go in the home.
Right, when you look at the home in the photos and it looks great, you go there and it's a disappointment. Right. It's first impressions really matter, as in many things. And once you've kind of lost the buyer on the way in the door, you've lost them completely. Yeah. Lost it completely.
Okay, so there
another
you can
bathroom
see, and
just same one here.
Yeah, just changing the flooring and paint.
That's all there is there. Yeah. If you look at everything, it looks exactly the same. It is literally taking up the carpet and repainting. That's all that was done here.
Next one. I think this is a great example to your point about curb appeal. This home and this photo in this condition may not have the as good a curb appeal as it could have, right? And then we see how different it looked when it came on the market a second time.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very much so. And the only difference there, if you analyze it closely, is that there's some paint. and a couple of trees, the scraggly trees around the front door were removed. But you can see it makes a huge difference to that home. And a lot of the trees that are in front of the home, back to everybody wants to live in new construction. New construction has very young trees. So what happened here is that planted some young trees, and it gave the impression of a new construction home. So
this was a great story. I brought the buyers to that house.
Yep.
And they're really happy there. It also speaks to the fact that when I'm working with buyers and they start to hone in on a community that they like and they see lots of listings coming on and they're getting excited, I always encourage them to go and do a drive-by. Because I think it's really important to also recognize that just because the photo makes the house look like it's set back from the street, there's nothing like the disappointment of driving up to the home and it's not at all what they thought. So to the extent that we can weed through all that, it just helps people because this is such an emotional process, you know?
Yeah. And one of the things that perhaps has come out of COVID that we didn't do before, everybody knows how to Zoom now. It's almost a verb, isn't it? And spending time with a buyer, perhaps on a Friday or a Thursday when homes have come on the market, allowing you to determine, well, is this a home I'm interested in? Talking it through on a Zoom call, literally, before you even make the decision to go and make a private showing. As we'll talk a little bit later, it can be quite hard to see homes today, a little more difficult than it was previously. Working, with the buyer's agent on that Friday night, what are we going to go and see on Saturday? I think that's the one benefit, if there is any benefit to come out of the pandemic, is that everybody's become very, very familiar with Zoom, and it's a great tool to be able to communicate while you're kind of showing the screen. Look at this one, we can show you through the photos. Yeah, but hold on a minute, look at the floor plan. Does this really work for you? You can have that great conversation.
And I'd love to think that anyone who chooses to watch this, there's so much information here that after the fact, I'd love to have a Zoom call. My colleagues as well will all have Zoom calls with people to go through this masterclass again. Because there's just so many little nuggets, that you never know what you're going to take away. So Zoom has been a great avenue.
Another landscaping one.
Yeah.
I remember this house. Yeah. What I remember about this house was how dark it was inside. Because if you look at the after photograph, all those windows have been opened up, leaving sunlight in, whereas before, there were trees in front of it, which reduced the amount of light in that house considerably. And what I remember from the before was, wow, this is a really dark home. Actually, not really. If you take the trees out, guess what? You can bring in that natural light.
So, it's also interesting because when we work with sellers, we have one mindset. When we work with buyers, we have another, right? So as a buyer, you're approaching the home. And again, the first impression is going to be how you enter the home. So take the recent listing we had in Saugus, that even though the home was on somewhat of a busy street, it was such a charming house that the seller knew we wanted to make the home have a very positive experience right from the beginning. So we intentionally wanted them to come and enter the home through the back where there was a very large deck. Because that's really life. That's how people would be living in the home, drive in, come in the back deck, go into the little mudroom. Great example, though. First impressions say so much.
Right. Look at that. So it's dark. You're going through the forest, really dark and dingy, this house. Yeah. Actually, no, it's not. It is today, but by taking those trees out, those scraggly trees, all of a sudden a complete different home. So, strategy 1, compete. Strategy 2, look past that. Still focus on the fundamentals, of course, because you can't change your fundamentals. But think about location, floor plan,
yeah.
The flow of the home. If it doesn't work today, it's unlikely to work even with fresh paint. But if you're willing to roll the sleeves up, if you like, doing some of that work, there is possibility to buy a home at a far more reasonable price that's got less competition. You just have to do some of that work afterwards, and hopefully we're giving you some examples here. Some of the things you can do, be it paint, landscaping here, and paint to be the big one, I think. But so there, 2 strategies in terms of
being successful.
Yes. There you go. Okay. So, how do you find that needle in a haystack? Because in the middle of May, there's going to be a lot of homes on the market. That's for sure. There aren't today. Here we are in early March. But how do you kind of find that needle in a haystack? What's best practices around that search?
Yeah, and again, the goal here, right, is to educate you so that you can be a smart consumer, a smart buyer. And so it comes down to knowing that you have the right to a buyer's agent. Not only the right, you need a buyer's agent, and you need a good one.
Yep.
You need, as we say, you don't want a doctor who does one procedure a year. You want a doctor who does several, right?
That's for sure.
So best practices are engage in a buyer's agent who you click with, who you feel comfortable with. Discuss your minimum needs, your would likes, your wants, your price point. Make sure to share with us anything that can help us understand what your situation is. Who are the main decision makers? Get that pre-approval letter from a lender. And clearly, as much as you may have a relationship with a lender in another part of the country, please heed our advice when we say please also consider having a relationship with a local lender. It's really important. And lenders are really good at looking at your situation and coming up with different scenarios of how to help you be the strongest buyer.
Right.
So it's really important to have a good lender. Your search strategy. There's so many different avenues, different apps where you can be looking at homes. But one of the things that I think is really important is that when I understand what you're looking for, I'm going to help direct you to towns where I think you're going to get the most home for your money. I'm going to narrow down your search to different towns that I think you really should check out, whether it's me driving you around them to give you like an area tour, whether it's me encouraging you to go and drive around them on the weekends or when you have some free time. In fact, just to segue for a second, some very lovely local buyers we had relocated here from California. You know who I'm talking about. And I have to say, their children were the best behaved, how they would drive to home, and they would just sit there with their little iPods watching movies as the parents would run in and out of the homes. But it was a really lovely experience, and they were doing it on the weekends. So in any event, narrow down the search, the towns that you really should check out. Setting up a search in MLS, the multiple listing service, where agents who are bringing homes on the market have to share them. So there's thousands upon thousands of homes that will be in that MLS search. In the MLS system, by honing in on the towns that you really are interested in, I'd set up a search for you based on the number of bedrooms and bathrooms and what your budget is. And so then you can start receiving emails on a regular basis to give you a better sense of what the homes will look like in those towns. That's been something that I know buyers have really enjoyed. And researching those towns with you on your behalf, doing whatever it takes to helping you. And we're going to talk more about how open houses have changed. But that's definitely an avenue of how people were seeing homes.
Right, and the idea here is to narrow down the number of towns.
Yeah, I find that if you have 3 towns that you're looking at, that's really a good number. Sometimes people want to look at more, and I'm all for it. We start off with a larger MLS search, but then we narrow it down. And amazingly, buyers find the right home, and the right home finds them.
And if you've got lots of homes in your search criteria, in March, February, there won't be very many homes.
Right.
But once you get to May, there will. And it becomes overwhelming. And so this is why the advice of narrow that search down to the towns that make sense, that you like at the end of the day, you could see yourself living in at a manageable number, because you'll end up, even in May, when there's a lot of homes on the market, with a manageable number of homes.
Sure.
Otherwise it becomes a bit overwhelming, I found.
Absolutely. And in terms of having your agent evaluate the homes for you, that's a given. I never want to waste people's time. So if I find clients who are looking at certain homes and I really don't think it's going to be the best area or they're going to be the best fit, I'm going to try to plant the seed of, hey, let's look at some other areas. Anything to help people work smart. That's really what it's about, right? Because the process can get overwhelming, and that's the last thing we want. So.
And back to that working smart, lots of information on our website around statistics. And so I just want to give you a quick example of one set of information which is useful in terms of narrowing down those towns, and that's the sell price distribution. So what this is how many homes sell in any given price point. So this happens to be Arlington.
Yeah,
so if you're at 700,000, this is a great town. You really should be thinking, Arlington should be in my list.
And to stick with that for a second, so we know that Lexington is a town that continues to attract motivated buyers, young families, families that have school-age children, whatever it is. But pretty soon it can get very frustrating when you consider that in the Lexington community, to have a home come on the market in the 700s, there's going to be 1 or 2. That can be pretty frustrating. So it's really important to understand if that's going to be your price point. Let's look at an Arlington. Let's go to the website. Let's look at some other towns, whether it's an Acton, whether it's a Westford, whether it's a Groton, whether it's just about educating you to what those communities have to offer, because they may meet your needs with the school system, with the cultural opportunities, with the land, so many other things. So this is a great example of something that's on our website.
Right, and so this is an easy way of saying Arlington, 700,000. Well, I'm also interested in Lexington. Okay, not that many homes come on the market, 27 in Lexington versus 72 in Arlington. So if you're at 700,000, you might include Lexington in your search, but it's much more likely you'll find a home in an Arlington.
And likewise, I know you like to point out the converse.
There's an opposite here, of course.
And it's a really good point. And that is, if you have a more generous budget, so let's say you can spend upwards of 1.5, You can choose to buy in Arlington, but you're going to be one of fewer homes there. So for resale, it's going to be a little trickier. Not that Arlington isn't extremely attractive, it is, but it's a certain type of market. We'll probably encourage you to look more in some other towns where your 1.5 is going to appreciate.
For example,
so take a Lexington.
Lexington.
Absolutely. 93 homes in that price range.
Yeah, and there was almost nothing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the key to using this kind of information.
Yeah.
There's a lot more information too. Back to that working smarter instead of driving around, of course. But also, am I going to look in a Western if I've got 700,000 to spend? Well, probably not, because you're unlikely to be successful. Right. Just as an example, and using the data that's on the website to kind of begin to kind of cull those towns, as well as bring towns in if you're, say, at a more higher budget.
So these are things that buyers think about. Like I said, buyers are smart, very smart. They've
Right.
done their homework. They're busy tallying so many different things in their mind.
So that, what has taken us, 15 or 20 minutes to describe can clearly take a lot longer. But eventually you have to get serious. You have to write the offer, get serious. So it's quite useful, I think, at this point to talk you through at a high level what's the different components of the offer, because I find buyers are a little bit confused by all the different pieces to it, and so I think it's worthwhile kind of talking through what's just at a high level what
Absolutely.
the offer is, and then we'll kind of layer on top of that some of the strategies that we use to be competitive in this environment.
Sounds good. I think it's also maybe helpful just to point out that every state is different, right? So Massachusetts is a two-step process. So in Massachusetts, once you found that home that you want to make an offer on, you have to submit an offer. And there'll be various forms that you'll fill out. Some of them will be standard that if you don't get this home, we can save it and you don't have to sign it again, like the Mass Consumer Representation Form. But in any event, the goal is to get you an accepted offer. Once you get an accepted offer, well, one of the things that you're going to have to submit, not just the paperwork, but an earnest check or an offer check. Typically, that's $1,000. Now, we know that will change if you're in a competitive situation, and we advise you accordingly. But you get your offer accepted, you've given $1,000. Then typically, you're going to have an inspection, and that happens within 5 to 10 days. Now, during the inspection, we look to educate you along the way, but clearly to point out that every home, whether it's new construction or it's an older home, is going to have issues. If for whatever reason you get buyer's remorse or something unfortunately comes up that makes you feel that you don't want to proceed, you get your $1,000 back. It's very important to point out that there are 2 steps in the process of buying a home in Massachusetts where you can potentially back out. And the first one is if you change your mind after the inspection. Clearly also to point out that when you do have an inspection, that's coming out of your own pocket. So whether you choose to have a pre-inspection because there's competition, that can run anywhere from $500 to $1,000. But again, it's money well spent. Or if you have the inspection after your offer is accepted, you're also going to be spending $500 to $1,000 depending on the size of the home. Is typically how that price is generated. Again, you're not doing this alone. As agents, we have resources. We have a list of inspectors who we recommend, who we work with, who we'll put you in touch with. In any event, we hope that the inspection goes very smoothly. If not, are we going to talk about it now, what you can do, or are we going to wait?
Purchase and sale? No, let's talk about the strategies.
Okay. Yep.
Layer those on afterwards,
okay.
I think.
So you get your offer accepted, you've given a $1,000 check, you have your inspection, everything goes well. Around 1 to 3 days later, after you get your inspection results and everything is good, you're going to then sign the purchase and sale agreement, which is referred to typically as the P&S. It's at that time, once the document has been finalized and you sign it first and then the seller signs it. Once that takes place, you're going to be giving another check that in addition to the $1,000 makes up 5% of the offer price that you are giving to this house.
So it's important to remember that.
Yes.
That in order to buy a home, before you start the mortgage process, there really is that 5% that's put down. So important to remember that. Think about that as you're thinking about your financing.
So once you have an offer accepted, and we know you're going to do an inspection, we put you in touch with an inspector. We also have put you in touch with some real estate attorneys who we speak very highly of because we've had good experiences with them. And that I cannot say enough is so important. Sometimes people think that it's easy to use someone's friend who's a real estate attorney or to use someone's cousin. And at the end of the day, again, knowing that this is such an emotional and stressful because of the amount of money that's involved, we really encourage you to use an attorney that we know and who we work closely with.
We've worked with before.
Absolutely, because we know they're going to do a great job of educating you along the way, because there are a lot of terms in that purchase and sale agreement that shouldn't be scary, but can be if you're not sure what they mean. The attorney costs can range anywhere from $500 to $1,500, Part of that is because you have an attorney who writes your purchase and sale contract, but then you need an attorney for the bank who's representing the bank when it comes to giving you that mortgage. Now, more often than not, it fortunately works out that you get to use the same attorney because the lender has approved that attorney. And in that case, that's a great thing because, again, just keeps the number of players involved in this process less, and it keeps things streamlined, which is a very good thing. So you have your accepted offer, you've given the initial check, you have your inspection, you get to the signing the purchase and sale agreement.
And then it gets money. Then we talk about money at this point.
So
of course.
Up until this point, you will potentially have been researching different lenders to find out, given your situation of whatever's going on in your life, that you have the best option to go with this lender because of the rates that he or she are going to give you. You submit an application for a mortgage. That's 1 day after you've signed your purchase and sale agreement. And then the lender gets to work and starts doing a lot of things behind the scenes to get the wheels in motion to be able to, 4 weeks later, give you the go-ahead that you have been approved for the loan that you need to buy the house. Now, if for whatever reason circumstances change, something happens, and the bank comes back and unfortunately says, we cannot give you the mortgage that you need to buy this house, that is the second opportunity where you can back out of the transaction and get your complete 5% back.
Right. Important to remember here that this is not you change your mind.
Right.
This is the bank refuses to. So there's no such thing as a non-refundable deposit. When buying a home, you can exit at the inspection point. If you find issues with the inspection, you can exit the mortgage contingency if for whatever reason the bank decides that they're not going to lend you the money. So those are the 2 points you can exit.
Okay, and then after you get that...
Almost there.
Yes.
Almost there.
So what important to point out, there's the mortgage application, and then there's the mortgage commitment. And that's referred to typically as the mortgage contingency date. That date comes, you get the go-ahead that you're going to get the loan that you need to buy your house, and then 14 days or so later, you get to close on the house. And at that point, you need to bring in the remaining balance of your down payment, so that you, along with the mortgage that you're going to get, can close on this lovely home. There will be some other closing costs, typically addressing the fact that you had a title search done, you had an appraisal done on the home. Right. There's the attorney costs for helping you with the transaction to bring you to the closing. There's the stamp tax based on the town that you're buying in. There's various closing costs that come into play as well.
So that's about a 6-week process from accepted offer to closing. So factor that in as well. It's not a long process, but it's usually somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks to go from an accepted offer all the way through to closing. It can be a little bit longer. Perhaps the seller wants to close a little bit later. It's difficult to bring it much closer than that, 4 to 6 weeks.
And the other thing that I find is really helpful is along the way, our job is to help normalize the bumps along the way. Because we found, as you well know too, in time of COVID, with so many motivated buyers, which was wonderful, there were also a lot of people who were looking to refinance their homes. And so lenders were really overwhelmed with so much going on. If there's an instance in your transaction where something has to be postponed or sort of pushed out, it's typically not a problem. We don't want you to overly stress about it. It's something that is discussed between the two attorneys, because remember, there's the buyer's attorney who represents you, and the seller has an attorney as well. And they do a lot of the discussing, and they do a lot of the negotiation. So, this is not something that's cast in stone. Every transaction is unique, but clearly, hopefully, showing people the big picture timeline is helpful.
Yep, exactly. Everyone's unique. Always something going on.
Yeah.
So inspection, that's usually quite a fraught time, but as you said before, every home has issues.
Right. So one of the other things I think is really important to point out is that we never want to encourage a buyer to buy a home without an inspection. At what other time in the life of that home are you really going to learn about it? So it's a really positive thing to do. The challenge or the question will be is, when are we going to encourage you to do that? So typically, if there's competition, we're going to encourage you to do something called a pre-inspection. Or in some cases, there are inspectors who will do a consult. Whatever it is, we're going to discuss the options with you based on the scenario of the home. But when it comes to doing an inspection, we really also want to set the bar to go into it knowing there are going to be issues. The challenge will be, to inform you enough that you know whether or not they're structural, or they're having to do with the foundation, or they're things that the GIS, is that what it's referred to when it's been put in the wrong way? Right. Whatever it is, to recognize the difference between what are big ticket items and what are things that you can deal with, right?
Yep.
So, when you have an inspection, the traditional approach is that your offer's been accepted. Within that 5 to 10 period, we schedule that inspection. It typically takes a good 2.5, 3 hours. You don't necessarily have to come with a notebook because you will get a nice detailed report with photos of all the things that the inspector is looking at. In any event, the goal there is for you to hopefully see nothing you want to go back to the seller with. But there is, in many cases, a situation where you go back to the seller, you want to negotiate some things, and you look to see if the seller will also meet you halfway, right? The key thing here is that the seller does not want the home to come back on the market. Once the home comes back on the market, it has a blemish, and buyers look at it with a very different lens.
Right.
So that's one approach, right, where you have the inspection, some things come up, you go back and you hope to negotiate some things. You're not looking to nickel and dime them because unfortunately that leaves a bad taste in the seller's eyes or the seller's mouth. So that's one example. You go back and you just hopefully everything is good. Another strategy with inspections is that you totally waive them. This is risky, but sellers love it. The way to help address that is that you do that pre-inspection. On the other hand, if you totally waive it, you're basically absorbing the risk that there could be issues with the home. We do ask you to sign something. We want everything to be very upfront, so there's no gray area here. But nevertheless, you choose to waive the inspection. You cut out that 5 to 10 period during that 6-week process. You go more quickly to the purchase and sale agreement stage. You're putting down that 5%, and everybody's happy. Right? So that's a second approach. Another approach, which is a very good one, I believe, to use in many instances, is that you basically you don't want to do the pre-inspection. You either don't have time because so often you're rushed, but you really want to do an inspection. So you build into your offer that you are going to have a threshold in which you say to the seller, we're doing that inspection. We know the value of doing one. We don't want you to think we're going to be nitpick. We are going to say that the first $10,000 of potential issues that come out of the inspection, we will not even go back to you to negotiate. But if there's bigger ticket issues that perhaps you didn't necessarily reveal to us or know about, we are going to want to negotiate. So there's that shared risk.
Yeah, we're kind of middle ground there. So different options, and clearly the way you go, which option you choose, depends very much on the house, depends on, if you're looking at strategy 1, where you've got a home which has got competition, then you may be, moving towards waiving that inspection, doing a pre-inspection. Right. If on the other hand, there's less competition, the home is overpriced, or perhaps it needs some work, then some of those other options come in. So the option that you choose here, or the strategy you choose here, very much depends on the house, the town, and that's where the buyer's agent come in to advise you which approach makes sense given the house itself. So that's an important point.
And it goes back to the buyer's agent relationship with the buyer. Because if you have lost home after home after home, I really find the buyer's mindset has changed. Mm-hmm. And when I know you really want the house, we have a different approach, and we approach the inspection differently.
Right, of course. Now financing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who's picking up the tab?
Yes.
So when you speak with your lender, they're going to ask you numerous questions to help really understand what your financial situation is, because they're not going to want you to give you a pre-approval where you're going to be looking at homes that are going to be a real stretch for you. So it's really important that when they look at your portfolio, they're going to look at how much of a down payment can you put down, because the higher down payment you can put down in a home, the stronger your offer. The lower risk to the bank. As I mentioned earlier, each town is different. So in a town like a Lexington or Arlington, you're going to be looking to make offers on homes where you can put down 20% at closing, and you're borrowing 80%, because you're going to be a much stronger buyer than if you're coming in saying, I want your house, but I have to borrow 90% because I only have 10%. And in fact, you can speak to the example that we just had with Saugus. Remember the 2 different offers that came and go for it?
You said there you don't want it to be a stretch goal buying this house. Has to be something of a stretch, of course, but you don't want to be a 95% borrower.
Which is what happened in that case,
It's happened in this case, because it's likely that the competition is an 80% or a 70% or a 60% borrower. And as you look at the risk of a 95% borrower versus a 60 or 70, 80% borrower, clearly it's much higher. And so you're thinking about, well, I'm going to stretch, and yes, I can afford this house if I borrow 95%. In a competitive environment, that's likely it's not going to be successful. So try and kind of be cautious with that stretch goal. As well as that, other things will happen. You don't want to be house poor. So pushing yourself to the very limit of your pre-approval and beyond in some cases, not necessarily the right strategy to be following, specifically if you're in a competitive environment.
Especially when you consider that the process of buying a home is once your offer has been accepted and you've signed the P&S, and then you've gone to apply for your mortgage, the bank starts to do all the things it needs to do to validate that you can get the loan you want. And one of them is to have an appraisal. In a market that's very strong, like a Lexington, an Arlington, an Acton, a Groton, there's so many in our area that are very strong markets. A home will most likely appraise at the offer price that has been accepted because there's a lot of activity going on. But unfortunately, if the home doesn't necessarily appraise, the bank is going to still only loan you the 90 or the 80% that you're asking for. So you're going to, in some situations, have to consider bringing some money to the table more than you wanted to. And that's something that, instead of being a scary thing, is something that needs to be talked about so that you're prepared for.
So you're ready for that up front.
Yeah.
They're going to lend based on the appraised value, not the offer value. That's a really important point, because you may offer 1 point something, but if the bank says, I can't quite justify that, and it's done independent of the bank as well, then you're going to have to bring some extra money. And that's why you don't necessarily want to be stretched, because you may not necessarily have that money to make up the difference.
And likewise, being very positive minded, Marcus, I'd like to say that if you're buying in a very strong town, with a good location, a good school system where there's a lot of competition, luckily the comps that will be used by the bank to look at whether or not they're going to loan you the amount that you need, you can be more confident that hopefully it should appraise.
Yes.
So that's the good thing. So again, we want you to buy smart, and location typically is a big part of that.
Yep.
And we want you to be happy. And we will remind you that prior to closing, be aware of your spending.
That's
right?
true.
Because we don't want you buying a new car. We don't want you celebrating yet on this home that you haven't closed on, because all of that will affect your credit score.
Right, because what the banks do is they pull your credit score just before the closing.
Just before.
So the last thing they want to see is that you went out and bought a brand new car.
To celebrate.
So don't do that. You can do it afterwards. Do it after closing, be my guest, but not before. That's key. You mentioned closing costs before. We've just itemized a few of those pieces here. There's a lot to it. There are a lot. A good source of this information is what that number will be, is the lender, of course.
Yes.
There are some calculators online which will give you a broad sense of what that number is. But the key people to ask is the lender in terms of what will that amount of money you need to bring to closing be.
Yeah.
So we'd recommend in this case, even though you can go online to get a broad sense of what that number is, the lender will be the right person to give you the accurate number. But you do have to pay this. So there is something else you need to bring. Thinking about that stretch, you do need to bring this in as well.
And from my experience, 3 things that have typically come up with questions from buyers, just to share, that I think is really helpful. One is knowing that you're going to buy a home where you're going to be at least at 20% down is really good, because there's that PMI where if you are not able to put the 20% down, there's sort of an extra cost that's involved.
Yep.
So again, we're going to try to guide you to buy smart, to buy in a home that's within your budget. The other thing I think that's really helpful is that typically when you set up your mortgage payment every month, it is going to include the real estate tax, and it is going to include something, the escrow. So things that you typically thought you'd have to pay for out of pocket every month, you don't necessarily have to. The lender is packaging your mortgage in the best possible way, and I think that's also very helpful for people to be aware of.
It gives you a sense of what that number will be, I think.
And then one more really good one. If you get a mortgage for a certain amount of money and you find that in the years to come you want to pay that mortgage down, you do not get penalized. Right. That's a good one.
Yep,
so if you win the lottery, you can go ahead and pay the mortgage down.
Right. There's no penalties, no prepayment penalties in Massachusetts.
And at one point there was. At one time.
Right.
So
at one time there was, not anymore. So you can always pay it down.
Yeah. All good.
You mentioned attorneys before as well.
Yeah. Really important. In Massachusetts, you're required to have an attorney assist you with the purchase of your home. Right. And I can't impress upon people enough to understand that the attorney relationship that you have is really key. Some attorneys are just so much better at explaining the process.
Yep.
And I believe that as buyers coming into this, you need that. You deserve that. So the buyer has an attorney.
Responsiveness too as well. I think that's the key one that I've noticed. The good attorneys keep you in the loop. us as well as the buyer in the loop.
Absolutely.
We've had the situation before where the buyer is, well, I don't know, the attorney hasn't told me where we are. I've not discussed the P&S with them. And so responsive attorneys are key as well.
And likewise, the responsive attorneys include us, your buyer's agent, in the communications, because there are things that the attorney doesn't need to handle. That's our role. It doesn't stop when we get you the house. It's all part of that ongoing process. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out. We already touched on this, but as a buyer, you could possibly have two attorneys, one who represents you in the transaction and writing the P&S and helping you negotiate along the way, and then one that represents the bank, Typically, we see attorneys who can represent both sides, and that's really nice.
Right.
So.
Yep. Makes it much smoother to go in. Much smoother in that case, because as you mentioned before, you don't want too many people in this thing. Keep it, tight with this kind of team of people around you, with a lender that you know that you're comfortable working with an attorney you're comfortable working with, and then that's what makes the transaction go much smoother. If you've got some people in there that are not kind of playing the game, not part of the team, it can often be a somewhat fraught and certainly much more stressful, I think it's fair to say.
Please. I think one of my colleagues mentioned this too recently. It's awful when 5 o'clock comes and your buyer's attorney has left for the day. Like, what's that all about?
Yes.
I'm sorry, you don't do this part-time.
Right.
So,
and I guess we should say that we have a list of attorneys we can recommend too. We recommend them because we've used them many, many times in the past. They find them responsive. They're part of the team. They care. There you go. That's the right way to put it. So, a little bit different in COVID. Some things were different. Some things we reverted to as we carried on through 2020 and now into 2020 are changing. But there are some things which are, if you like, not business as usual, I think it's fair to say.
And in fact, I think have become actually better practices in many ways, right? So with the COVID impact on everyone's lives, showings were restricted. In some cases, homes didn't even have open houses. But if there were showings, it was important that masks were required. There was usually some disinfectant or sanitizer available. As mentioned here, some homes didn't even have open houses, so that was very frustrating, and really made it hard to get in as well. Let's see what else.
But if you do have open houses, we found those to be challenging too.
Absolutely, because buyers were allowed to go in one group at a time. And when it was cold, you'd find open houses where buyers were standing out in the cold,
lined out in the freezing cold.
Yeah, it's really very.
So it really, in terms of open houses, as listing agents, we're challenged with: do we do open houses? Do we not? But what we found is that if you don't have open houses, buyers make private showings,
and those are the buyers that you want, because they're the motivated buyers. They're the ones who actually really think the house could be a good fit. We loved our open houses because pre-COVID, it was such an wonderful opportunity to interact with people. And we would see the same buyers at some of our open houses. So it'd be nice to get back to that at some point, because there is that energy that people bring to the house when they come to visit it. And it's wonderful because we're showcasing an open house when we're the listing agent. When you're the buyer trying to get in and you have a 15-minute slot and that slot's isn't enough, and someone else is trying to right away get in. It becomes
upsetting. Very stressful, and you have multiple groups in the home, and what happens is that you're more worried about the other groups than you are about looking at the home. Right. So we think private showings are the way to go. That's key. I think it's fair to say.
In addition to that, we know that digital media is playing an even more important role for helping our buyers make decisions about a home. Whether it's the website, the 3D tour, it's the quality of the pictures. We know, again, as buyers, you're very smart these days. When you look at a home, and it's a 4-bedroom home, and 2 bedrooms are shown and 2 bedrooms aren't, and it has 3 bathrooms and only 1 bathroom is shown, it doesn't take a scientist to say, what the hell was going on with the other 2 bathrooms? Yep. So digital media has been a wonderful avenue to really help highlight the homes that are really good and are worth seeing.
Yeah, that's key. You mentioned this previously around financing, that last year, now we'll see how this year plays out, but last year we definitely saw slower loan processing. Lots of refinances with a very low interest rate, buyers buying homes too, the banks, everybody working from home, we found, certainly at the beginning of 2020, lots of closings were delayed just because of financing. The banks just couldn't quite get their act together, if you like, given the environment they're in.
Absolutely.
Not quite sure how that will play out in 2021, Rates are still very low. I'm sure there's a lot of refis going on. So, there's a potential there for slower loan processing, I think, moving forward too.
I think, again, it just speaks to the fact that we have conversations with you as our buyer. We want you to understand along the way that there are going to be some hiccups. Some will be out of your control, so please don't worry. Some will be within your control, and that's a matter of what mindset you have going into this in the first place. But our goal is to continue to keep the communication lines flowing, continue to help you realize that you are going to get there.
It is going to get there eventually. Everybody wants you to buy the home. It's just there's a lot going on right now. And I think that's what was going on. So it wasn't that banks didn't want to lend the money, they did. It just was kind of slow. Everybody was figuring out how to work from home. How do you actually do that? So that's what we saw. Some lower appraisals as well. That's moved on because the appraisers, remember, the appraisal value is the value that the banks will lend against. They won't lend against the offer value. They'll lend against the appraised value. And so we did have the situation where some appraisals came in low because the appraisers weren't actually going into homes. That's moved on. We've moved on from that now. So appraisals should be much simpler 2021 than we saw in 2020.
We hope.
Okay. Kind of rolls it all up here, I guess. Back to what we said before, Zoom, virtual consultations, looking at homes, looking at the floor plan, the photographs, everything you can before you make that private showing. And in fact, we track how many people look at our 3D tours and floor plans. And what we find is there's a huge amount of activity on the Thursday and the Friday. It drops off on Saturday and Sunday because Thursday and Friday is when people are deciding whether they're going to view the home. Saturday and Sunday they actually view the home, and then it peaks again on Monday as those buyers that have felt that yes, this is a home that works for them, now I'm going to write the offer. I want to refamiliarize myself with that home.
Right. In fact, just to touch on the next two, I think the electronic signature process is it's a really easy one, and it's one that it doesn't have to be scary for people. But this idea that we can exchange the paperwork through the email system, then I can pass it on to the agent is really a very
all of that's been kind of worked. We've worked out how to electronic signatures, do everything electronically as well.
I don't like the next one. I don't like the next one at all.
No,
so,
I don't like the virtual hands-off inspection.
Yeah.
We certainly saw that in 2020 where the inspectors were reluctant to have buyers with them.
We found it once, and it was when a client of mine did not listen when I suggested a different inspector.
Okay.
So clearly, again, this is an opportunity for you, the buyer, to be informed, and to be part of the process. And so inspections really should be done in a way that you can be part of the process.
Yep, you absolutely have to be. That's key. So all of that's kind of worked out. We can do virtual home buying. We've figured it out. It didn't take us very long. Probably by the middle, 2/3 of the way through the year, we'd worked out how to do all of those different things. And as we move forward now to 2021, some of the limitations we have will begin to disappear.
In fact, the buying dashboard is a great example that you can touch on if you like, that how we're proactively trying to continue to stay in touch with our clients. A buying dashboard, I think, is not something that people really would see with other avenues.
Right. So we rolled this out early part of last year so that it's an app on your phone. You can see exactly where you are through the buying process. It tells you all the key dates, how far away you are, how it kind of gives you that one-stop shop for all the information that you need as things change. So the information in the dashboard changes, gives you a sense of exactly where you are, what's coming next, how far away is that, all of those kind of things.
In fact, a great example just happened with one of my clients. As a buyer, you have at least 3 opportunities to go back and visit the home once you've had your accepted offer. And so it's something like the schedule of when you want to go in would be on the buyer dashboard.
Yep, that would
anything
all be
like
in
that,
there.
I think would be
all
really
of that
helpful.
would be in there.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of our buyer seminar. I'm going to let Rachel finish off with, so what is our commitment to you, the buyer? Because clearly it's long, it's throughout the whole process, not just the offer writing process. That's important too, but kind of all the way through.
Thank you. Yes. To build that relationship and make it be a positive one and let it carry on for many years to come. But our commitment to you is to educate you on the local real estate market, to guide you on your financing options, help you find great homes that fit your needs and your wants, arrange those showings, work with your schedule, make that happen, evaluate properties, whether it's through Zoom or it's over the phone or it's in a detailed email, whatever works for you. Strategize the offer, negotiate on your behalf, and that's a good one because oftentimes we know the agents on the other side, we know how to negotiate that offer, we have relationships with them, and that can really work in your favor. Advise you through the inspection, coordinate the activities through your closing, and do it all with integrity and ethical behavior, educating you along the way. It's really not a selling, it's not a transaction, it's a relationship.
Very much so, very much so.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching.
Elbow.
Any questions?
Elbow.
Any questions you have, please reach out to Rachel. Any questions at all about the whole buying process, we're here to help. As Rachel mentioned, it's all about education. We are here to educate you throughout the whole process, all the way from, I think I want to buy a home, to here are the keys to closing. So that's key.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.